Now, Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel says the way Europe deals with the migration crisis will shape the continent in the long term. She also warned that last night's agreement by European leaders, including a pledge of €1 billion, was only the first step in solving the crisis. This morning, it's been reported that 1,200 people arrived on the Greek island of Lesbos in under an hour. Well, join me from central London, Nina Schick, Communications Director of Open Europe, an independent EU policy think tank. Thank you very much for joining us here on Sky News this morning. €1 billion has now been pledged by the European countries. Is that really a drop in the ocean?
Well, I think the first thing to point out is that so much time, political capital has been wasted on this idea of mandatory quotas to share 120,000 asylum seekers outside the EU, which has really bittered the debate. Now, this money which EU leaders pledged yesterday is a necessary step, and it's actually something that David Cameron has been calling for other EU leaders to do in order to support the origin and transit countries, so that if anybody was listening to the UNHCR or the World Food Programme for the past few months, you would have heard how they've been saying they've been running out of money in the camps in the transit and origin countries. And it's no surprise then that given the deteriorating conditions, so many more people have made the journey to Europe. So unless Europe can support its neighborhood and find more effective ways to deal with it, it really is a drop in the ocean, and there will be more people coming.
And I guess the difficulty is there'll be some countries like Turkey who will say, well, we've already been spending, say, €6 billion on this crisis within our own borders, so we're really going to need a lot more help now. I mean, where does Europe go from here?
Well, like I said, the first thing to point out is so much time has been wasted on talking about this mandatory quota to relocate refugees and asylum seekers within the EU. Focus needs to shift away from that into more long-term sustainable solutions. Number one, giving more money and support to countries like Turkey, to countries like Jordan, countries like Lebanon, actually making sure the EU's external border is secure. Because it's no wonder that, given that you're talking about 22 countries in a border-free travel zone, the Schengen area, that when refugees start coming in, if the external border isn't secure, that you see other countries such as Hungary then shutting down their borders. You also want to set up these hotspots in Italy and in Greece on the front line, where you start registering the people that are coming in, so you actually have an idea of who's coming in, where they're coming from, and who they are. So, for example, you have migrants, economic migrants, and asylum seekers and refugees. So those people coming from Africa cannot be treated the same as those who are coming from Syria or Afghanistan, and indeed those people from the Western Balkans. Interestingly, a lot of these people claiming asylum in the EU and in Germany, 40% of them were actually coming from the Western Balkans. So you need to tailor your policy response depending on the group of people who's coming. And of course, they have different challenges facing each one of them.
There has been a lot of talk about the introduction of a quota system, hasn't there? Can I just get your thoughts on that? Will a system like that work?
Well, absolutely not. So what happened this week is that the EU interior ministers met, and against the opposition, the vocal opposition of some of the Central and Eastern European countries, they pushed through by a majority vote a quota system whereby 120,000 asylum seekers will be distributed around the EU. The reason why that won't work, number one, is you're trampling across the democratic sovereignty of national countries who don't want to do this, who don't want to partake in this scheme, at the behest of more powerful countries like Germany and France, who are very much in favor of it. And second, as I already mentioned, you're talking about countries in a border-free zone in Schengen. So once you assign a quota of people to a certain country, how are you going to ensure that they actually stay there? Apart from asking them politely to stay there, would you want to stay there if you know you're not welcome there? There are no facilities for you there. So that's why this idea of a quota has just been politically toxic, wasted so much time, and rather the EU should have been focusing on more long-term measures like supporting the transit countries, the origin countries, and making sure those external borders are really beefed up, and that they can actually start identifying the people who are coming and distinguishing between the different groups to ensure that those who really need help the most get it.
Okay, Nina Schick, many thanks indeed.